So thank you all for being here. Just to start, recent advances in artificial intelligence have caused an interesting cultural moment, have they not? I haven't quite seen such a mixture of fascination and dread, hype, optimism, pessimism, confusion. There are many things that we could talk about in like way more than the 45 minutes that we have here together. So I want to save some time for questions at the end, plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to try to hit questions at 3:10, and that gets us done and out by 3:25. So you have plenty of time to walk back over to the Old Chapel Hall. So I'll split my time today based on some of the things I saw in the pre-conference survey between the theoretical and the practical. Sort of what is AI, is it intelligent, is it sentient, etc. And then some concerns, but we can't hardly go through all of them, and maybe that will be open for questions in terms of people having the right use of AI and its implementation today. So, above all, I'll take the framing principle from Pope Leo XIV, Magnificat Humanitas, paragraph 15, where the Pope writes, quote, "In the era of artificial intelligence, when human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human. We must lovingly safeguard the grandeur of humanity bestowed upon us and revealed in its fullness in Christ, the splendor of which no machine can ever replace," end quote. So with that in mind, I want to talk first briefly about what AI is and how it's different than human intelligence. And this is important in itself, but it's also important for part two, which is the prospects and the perils of AI, at least briefly touched on, since if you don't know how AI works, it's harder to say how it might be used responsibly. Now, this is something I poll every audience, and I find it's vastly different because I've given a number of talks on this lately. Just out of curiosity, it varies wildly. How many people have first ever used AI, like something like ChatGPT, Grok, Claude? Okay, so that's a fair number. Okay, good. How many people use it routinely for something like a business purpose? All right, so that's probably about a quarter. Good. Well, we'll see where that goes then. Sometimes it's been almost nobody, and then sometimes it's been like the whole crowd. When I was in Alexandria, everyone was military, government, etc., and it was like 95% of people that used it. So I'll start with a broad definition of what artificial intelligence is, because I think it's helpful to disentangle some confusions about how people think about it in popular discussion. First, I just wonder, how far back do you think the term goes, artificial intelligence? How old is that term? Does anyone have a gander? Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah, 1955 is one of the earliest recorded uses of the term. And I'll go with this very broad definition because I think it helps put it in some context. An artificial intelligence is a machine capable of performing a task previously performed only by human intelligence. Now, it's a very broad definition, but I think it helps put things in some perspective. Whenever there's some major advance in this sort of technology, people naturally want to compare it to the human intellect and ask themselves, what have we made? When the technology is really sophisticated, like it's gotten to these days, people naturally wonder whether the machine itself possesses intelligence. And I got to say, if you spent some time with it, you do get that uncanny impression, do you not? Having talked to it for a little while. I've been using it for several years on and off, not chiefly for my academic purposes, though it's sometimes a helpful research tool. But I talk to it about all kinds of things. And you do get this uncanny sense, right, that you're talking through the screen to something that is quasi-human. So some people today wonder whether modern natural language AIs are sentient, intelligent creatures with a soul or personhood like we have. And I think a good answer requires an interdisciplinary perspective, which is why it is so hard, right? It requires some good theology and philosophy, but also some scientific education, especially computer science. And I think some history of science is also really useful as well. So that's part of the theme of this conference, right, is the importance of an interdisciplinary perspective to answer some of these questions facing Catholics today. For many people, when they ask whether an artificial intelligence is like human intelligence, they're kind of comparing a black box to a black box. I don't know if you're familiar with that engineering term. A black box is something you know how to use, but you have no idea what's going on inside, right? They don't do a lot of philosophy of mind, and they also don't know how the AI is built. So sometimes when that happens, they can leap to some fantastic conclusions, and we want to avoid that. So I'll start with some basic points about the operation of the human intellect, And here I'm a little bit indebted to the work of the modern Canadian Thomist, Father Bernard Lonergan, who I think gives a helpful little schema in the beginning of his book, Method in Theology. Consciousness is awareness that you are aware. It is reflexive awareness. Transitive awareness is common to all animal life. Animals are aware of their environment, of their feelings like pain and hunger. They are aware of other creatures and their potential reactions. The cat keeps itself hidden from the bird watches out for cats. But consciousness is an awareness of oneself as the unified source from which all the activities of life flow, whether they are physical, biological, sensory, or emotional actions, or things in the memory. Consciousness is an awareness of the self, and I at the root of all that pertains to me. Rational creatures have an additional power to understand. Understanding gathers many individual objects of awareness and groups them together based on some common feature of them all, and can discuss those commonalities abstractly as concepts. Abstraction and conceptualization are very powerful, right? I do not need to ponder all triangles individually. I can consider them all at once as triangles. If the more sophisticated beasts have the beginnings of these powers, because I think that's a fair question, they are at best quite modest. But man has something unique. Rational consciousness is not only aware of its awareness, but is aware of its understanding. What's more, we can direct our understanding. This presupposes some measure of freedom. Understanding in us is surely not automatic. Sometimes it is, but it's not always automatic. It's very easy to state what a prime number is. You have to decide to work much harder to figure out how many there are or how frequent they are, right? That's laborious. That might take you some time and takes dedication. Humans are set apart from beasts by their capacity for rational self-reflection. We can direct our intellect to try to understand itself and the conscious subject that is the seat of all of our activities. Rational creatures also possess the faculty of judgment. We can make propositions, which are statements that relate concepts to one another or to particulars, and we can ask if these propositions are true or false. One can understand that by a triangle, I mean a three-sided plane figure, that's a concept, but it's an act of judgment to affirm as true the proposition that the sum of the interior angles of a triangle is always 180 degrees. Judgment, too, presupposes some measure of freedom and our awareness of it. Someone can be aware that he is inclined to judge something as true, but decide to hold off from that judgment and consider things the other way around first before leaping to conclusions. Rational creatures have an incredible capacity to mentally conjure up all kinds of possible scenarios, but they ultimately recognize that truth is conformity of one's mental judgments to extra-mental reality. On a still higher level of consciousness, human beings have values. We can consider things not only insofar as they are true or false, but insofar as they are good or evil. In Virginia, we have many different types of wild mushrooms. Some are quite delicious. Others are deadly. That's how mushrooms go. It would be a true judgment to conclude that chanterelles make a healthy meal. It would be an incorrect judgment to conclude that destroying angels make a healthy meal. The name's trying to help you a little bit there. But it would be a different sort of incorrect judgment, a judgment that's bad on the level of value, of good and of evil, to conclude that lethally toxic destroying angels should be fed to one's campmates. Human beings are aware that we have a capacity for free action. We understand that we have freedom and we need to use it for good and not for evil. We have a conscience. We do not perceive the world as a bare space of facts to which we add somehow extrinsic directives. Our will is attracted to choices insofar as it perceives them as good. Human beings don't merely know the truth, they love the good. Crowning all this reflective consciousness is the fact that the human person has the ability to ask ultimate questions about himself and what he should do with his life. Pope Benedict XVI often returned to the inescapability of these ultimate questions when he sought to engage with materialism, atheism, and nihilism. The ultimate field of human intellectual inquiry is unlimited. We are dissatisfied with understanding the merely proximate and finite beings around us. Every intelligent person and every culture under the sun has asked himself, where did this all come from? What made the world and what gave it its marvelous existence and structure? Why are there these creatures rather than nothing at all? So too we raise questions of ultimate value. Considered as a whole, what is the meaning of human life? By what standard can we answer such a question? What may I hope for after I die? How do I understand the value of the transient actions that I do here and now in light of the fact that 100 or 2 years from now, my name and my deeds may be utterly forgotten to earthly history? Human action is purposeful. We do short-term good actions in the pursuit of greater goods, of some longer, bigger goal, but that raises another ultimate question, which is, what is the ultimate goal in light of which I do anything at all? These sorts of thoughts are natural to man, and they lead the human soul back by 100 different avenues to God, the uncaused cause, and the supreme good of the world, and our hearts are restless until they rest in Him. The human soul, with its rational, reflective freedom, seeks the real, the true, the good, and the beautiful by its very nature. How different is the case with machines, including those machines that are neural network-driven large language model GPT AIs that are making so much news today. First, these AIs are fundamentally deterministic in their behavior. They all run on the same kind of computer hardware that powers your desktop computer, although it's networked into massive clusters and data centers. They all use, for example, digital logic, transistor-based logic gates and memory arrays, some kind of modified von Neumann architecture optimized for parallelism. I don't know if there's any comp sci people here. Photos here. So in the language of computational theory, they are all finite deterministic transition systems. That's a fancy technical term, but in theory, their computational output could be entirely replicated by a non-electrical, purely mechanical machine, a mechanical cogwork, like the levers and gears in an old-fashioned adding machine. Except such a machine would be huge, the size of a large city, and it would be incredibly slow, but you could do it entirely without electricity. My point here is that there's nothing magical about miniaturization, the addition of electricity, or simply the scale of these computers that introduces the capacity for some kind of freedom or sentience within them. Any more than adding more gears to your car will eventually give you a sentient car. Human intelligence is a substantially different metaphysical entity. Atheist materialists will beg to differ with me on this point, and maybe we can take that up in questions more if people want to pursue that line of argument. The same can be said, if you think I'm starting too low by looking at the hardware, of the neural network program that runs on this hardware and forms the core of the GPT algorithm. The trained neural network goes from input to output in a deterministic way. It's just a bunch of large vector and matrix multiplication operations that relate a series of input words to the trained synaptic weights of the neural network and generate an output word in response, one word after another. Its behavior is entirely reducible to these deterministic operations, even if they do add from time to time some randomness in the output for flavor. And if there are technical folks here, I'm aware of techniques like stochastic gradient descent in training to avoid falsely settling on local minima in the error function, but that fundamentally doesn't change the operation of the trained network, or my point here. So AI is a substantially different type of entity than the conscious, embodied, intelligent, free, and morally responsible soul of a human being. Which brings me to my second point. I think sometimes people are led astray by a certain fallacy of functionalism. Recall my broad definition of AI from earlier, a machine that performs a task previously done only by human intelligence. Just because a machine performs an operation associated with human intelligence does not mean that it has an intelligence. When talking about these topics, it's important to distinguish the agent the process and the result. Two very different agents, man and machine, can do two very different processes internally and achieve the same result. Consider, for example, a jar of loose change that's full. We probably all have one somewhere in the corner of our house. And I have one picture. Let me pull it up here. The time has come to count it. If you're like me, you probably sort, stack, and tally. Quarters, nickels, dimes, pennies, stack them, count them, and consider that process. It uses your sight, your human understanding of arithmetic, and it arrives at a result, the total amount of money that you have. Consider, by contrast, the kind of mechanical coin counting machine that you used to see in banks all the time. I'm talking about this guy if you grew up bringing your change jar to something like this. A mechanical wheel spins around, coins fall through precisely shaped holes. They hit levers that advance gears, which turn a dial of numbers that tells you the total amount. An entirely different process by an entirely different type of agent, but it arrives at the same result. One cannot affirm simply on the basis of sameness of result that the process or the agent are the same. This is where a lot of mistakes happen, I think, metaphysically, when people start talking about what an AI is. People are overawed by the power of modern AIs to replicate many tasks which previously only a human intelligence could do. And so they leap too quickly to the conclusion that what is going on under the hood must be like human intelligence in many respects, and that conclusion is often unwarranted. Consider further the cleverness of the coin counting machine. You might call the machine's operation clever, but what you really mean by that is that its human inventor is clever in the arrangement of such a machine. He found a way to accomplish the task by breaking it down into mechanical steps that produce the correct result. That's algorithmic thinking. When the machine counts a gallon-sized jug of change in 2 minutes, you might say, hey, that's pretty smart. But all the genuine intelligence there comes from man. The human knowledge of arithmetic and currency, and the human algorithmic thinking that created the device. This fact does not change when the machine can do things faster or more accurately than a human can by doing it directly. In this regard, we've had artificial intelligences that have excelled human capabilities for decades now. Calculators, computers, sorting machines, all that kind of stuff. The genius, of course, of modern large language model AIs is that their inventors have discovered a way to create a computer program fundamentally based on a neural network that is an incredibly versatile mimic of the intelligent human writing that is contained in a staggering volume of texts. Now, we don't have time to discuss, it would be fun, it'd take a little bit longer than we've got though, what neural networks are as a programming technique. That's fascinating. I've been playing with them since the time I was a much younger man, when the technology couldn't do nearly as much, but was still awfully interesting. And the GPT architecture in particular, although I had a wonderful advanced studies student a couple of years ago that gave some lectures here together with me on the history of the tech, and then he goes into a deep dive on the GPT architecture. I think it's on the Christendom website somewhere, Ambrose Cavalier's wonderful work. I think it's a wonderful explanation because it doesn't presume that you know all these neural network libraries, but does go through it in a rather detailed amount if you're interested in that kind of thing. But the core competence of neural networks, just to put it like very simply and primitively, is that they excel at pattern recognition, imitation, prediction, and transformation. Some examples of common neural network technology, if you don't know what I'm talking about, things that have been around for a while, are things like optical character recognition. That's been used to sort the mail since the 1970s. Image classification, spam detection, shopping recommendation systems. You know, when Amazon pops up, if you bought X, you might be interested in Y. All trained, right, on an enormous volume of data to elicit the patterns and connections in it. The neat thing about neural networks is that once trained on a sufficiently representative body of training data, their operation is generalizable. They can work on inputs that they've never seen before, and they can generate outputs that are not procedurally coded by the programmer. This is very different than procedural coding. A corollary of this, which you have to watch out for, is that their outputs are never 100% guaranteed to conform to the designer's expectation, and that can be dangerous, say, for example, when you put them in charge of autonomous weapon systems. LLMs, large language models, are trained on an enormous body of text. We don't know the details for the current front runners of the multi-billion-dollar market, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, Gemini. Those are all proprietary. But even a few iterations back, several years ago, when ChatGPT was releasing sort of its internals for research purposes, ChatGPT 3.0, way back then, right, when it was comparative adolescent, was trained on 470 gigabytes of text. I don't know if people can fathom exactly how much textual information that is. That's 365,000 one-inch thick volumes. Or, since we're in the library right now, if you filled every last shelf to capacity, upstairs and down, whole library, 3 times this. That's 470 gigabytes of textual information. I'm sure the modern models are trained on much more and much better information than the original ones. That's a huge volume of information, and that's important to remember when you're sort of mystified by the kinds of things that ChatGPT can produce. But imagine for a moment, just as a thought experiment, I don't know if there's a polite word for this, but we used to call them idiot savants. Maybe you've seen the movie Rain Man or something like that. Someone with a prodigious photographic memory. He remembers everything that he's ever read and never forgets it. Imagine that he had the time to read 365,000 books. Already no human being could do this. If you read 10 books a day, it would take you 100 years to do that. Supposing further that although our savant remembers everything as things he's seen before in text, he didn't really understand any of it, but he could, in response to any statement, quote, remix, blend, or paraphrase similar things he's seen before elsewhere. Neural networks do likewise. A very primitive analogy, but fundamentally I think maybe it's instructive if you don't know how they work. They can draw upon all this information and remix it in response to the human prompting it using extremely advanced pattern recognition. It's genius, but like the cleverness of the coin counting machine, it's the human genius in the computer programming acting on the human genius in all of that writing that produces the truly impressive result. The machine itself, we should not conclude, therefore, is intelligent. Now, suppose you met this guy on the street, someone who could talk to you in detail about any period of world history or literature, any documented language, who was conversant with all the major branches of math and science, who knew a ton about medicine, social science, law, economics. You would think that man is a superhuman genius. That's why it's hard for people to shake the conviction that ChatGPT is profoundly intelligent. But just like the coin counting machine, ChatGPT produces intelligent results not because it is an intelligent creature with a superhuman thought process, but because it distills and presents the intelligent writing of hundreds of thousands of intelligent people. So again, maybe to put it super simply, to attribute to the machine superhuman intelligence because it does what it does is a little bit like making the same sort of mistake that if you thought Wikipedia was the name of some guy who wrote everything on that website. Another reason why LLMs seem so human comes from the fact that they are trained on human writing. And from the time we are 2, we funnel everything in the totality of our human experience into speech, right? We don't just articulate our thoughts, but we talk about our bodies, our growth, our emotions, our psychology, our culture, our values, our objectives. Everything funnels into speech. And so because AIs imitate human-authored text, they imitate but do not have emotions and values. So I just wanted to wrap this point up by some contrasts between human intelligence and large language model GPT AIs, going back to my description of human consciousness at the beginning. Human intelligence is free. AI is deterministic. Human intelligence is creative. AI is mimetic. It's imitative. Human beings are curious. Aristotle wrote, right, 2,400 years ago, that all men by nature desire to know. AIs like this only respond to a prompt. Human beings are concerned that their thought is true, that it conforms to extramental reality. And AI is only concerned that it conforms to its training data. You could train an AI on complete fiction, and it wouldn't ever care or know differently. It has no access to the extramental world like you and I do. Humans have consciousness, consciences. We have an intuitive awareness of our free will and the need to use it for what's right. We are morally responsible agents. Leo XIV comes back to this again and again in Magnifica Humanitas. AI has no conscience. It executes its directives and it imitates the behavior it sees in its training data, and that's part of the problem. It can be trained to act as though it has a conscience, but it is imitating somebody else's human conscience, and it pays to ask whose. Humans love and have a transcendent desire for God. So that's just sort of a bigger picture perspective on a brief but beautiful paragraph in Magnifica Humanitas 99, where the Pope makes his own statement about the difference between artificial intelligence, and there he uses scare quotes, he puts it in quotes, and human intelligence. So maybe just to wrap up by reading that for you. The Pope writes, "We must avoid the misconception of equating this type of intelligence with that of human beings. These systems merely imitate certain functions of human intelligence. In doing so, they often surpass human intelligence in speed and computational capacity, offering tangible benefits across many fields. Yet this power remains entirely tied to data processing. So-called artificial intelligences do not undergo experiences, do not possess a body, do not feel joy or pain, do not mature through relationships, and do not know from within what love, work, friendship, or responsibility mean. Nor do they have a moral conscience, since they do not judge good and evil, grasp the ultimate meaning of situations, or bear the responsibility for consequences. They may imitate language, behavior, and analytical skills, or even simulate empathy and understanding, but they do not understand what they produce, for they lack the affective, relational, and spiritual perspective through which human beings grow in wisdom. Even when these tools are described as capable of learning," again, scare quotes, "their way of doing so is different from that of a human person. It is not the experience of those who allow themselves to be shaped by life and grow over time through choices, mistakes, forgiveness, and fidelity. Rather, it is a form of statistical adaptation based on data and feedback, which can be very effective, but does not imply inner growth," end quote. So I thought that was a beautiful quote, but that's the most direct place where the Pope addresses some of these fundamental differences between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. So how are we doing on time? We got to wrap up soon. So part two, and a little bit more briefly, some prospects and pitfalls of artificial intelligence. Now, I believe that large language model AIs can provide real value to human life. I am not yet a doomer. Maybe younger people, Generation Z, already hates it, but I do think it is potentially a vastly useful technology. I say that in part because so many technologies that I've defined in the broader sense as artificial intelligences surely have proven their use and value to the human race, right? Before we even get to neural network-based technologies, a host of tabulators, calculators, and simple computers, automated telephone switchboards, the modern all-purpose desktop digital computer, word processors, spreadsheets, databases, automated payroll systems, accounting systems, and banking systems, GPS navigation and pathfinding, and many, many more technologies like this. All of these replaced what people used to do once by hand, so to speak. These technologies, in turn, have greatly assisted the flourishing of science, industry, commerce, medicine, research, and education. I don't think anybody would really want to just ditch all of those things. Special purpose neural networks, so that do just one thing, specialized neural networks, have likewise also brought great benefits. Optical character recognition and image processing has helped to put so much information online. I love you, archive.org, wherever you are. The PhD student in the audience is nodding her head in affirmation. I love the things that you can get on that. It's amazing. I love our library right here, but there are some wonderful things that you can find online. Text-to-speech reads to the blind. Medical imaging helps with early disease detection. AI helps industrial quality control, business logistics optimization, weather prediction, all kinds of things, right? Specialized purpose AIs. Turning to modern large language model AIs, even if we leave aside the wild spectacle of futuristic AI hype and marketing grift, because there is a lot of that, I think it's hard to discount the 900 million daily users of LLM AIs and thousands of businesses investing in it. Clearly, there's some real value here, right? No one has a gun to these businessmen's heads to invest in the ways that they consist. Anthropic, the maker of Claude, recently released, I think it was March of this year, a survey of 81,000 AI users from across like all the main continents, not just a first world survey. And that's a fascinating thing to review. You can see a lot of prospects and perils in that survey if you Google it. But one of the predominant uses that these people had hoped AI would do was simply accelerate their business efficiency, right? Help them do more quickly all of the things that are grind work and the tasks that they routinely face so that they can get back to more human activity and more meaningful activity in the execution of their business. A lot of other people are using it in situations where they don't have access to great education or life skills training to get that sort of thing. Now, that can be a little dangerous because you want to trust your source there. But a lot of the envisioned uses of it are not particularly wild or exotic that require a superhuman intelligence. I think sometimes it can just be perfectly fine for a lot of people as a glorified Google search. Right? So the question is not, ought a machine perform something that formerly a human intelligence did? We have surely answered that question affirmatively 1,000 times already in our antecedent use of technology. Yet there are very important questions to face. Right? Some are the same as with any new technology. We must consider its moral versus immoral use. Oftentimes, the greater the good, the greater the potential for evil. The same technology that gave us nuclear power gave us the atomic bomb, which is the biggest existential threat to the human race that we've ever yet seen. And with any tool, we have to consider how the use of the tool changes us and to consider its broader social impact. But Magnifica Humanitas is quite clear that this sort of analysis does not go far enough. Modern artificial intelligence raises unique questions because its ability is not just a specialized ability, but it can imitate the higher and more precious functions of human intelligence. The scope for its potential misuse is far greater. The effects on the human user can be far deeper. The social impact can be far wider. And as people lose sight of the fundamental difference between man and machine, we face new threats to human dignity and the temptation to abandon the uniquely human roles and responsibilities for which God has created us and for which there is no machine replacement. So since we don't have a lot of time, I just wanted to touch on some, but just some, of the concerns that the latter half of Magnifica Humanitas raises in this regard. I don't know if you've had time to digest that 245 paragraph encyclical by now. It's quite large, and the first half of it is a magisterial review of like principles of Catholic social teaching. So that's a lot to go through right there. And sometimes people call it the AI encyclical, and really it's only about a third AI, half tech, and the first half is all principles of Catholic social theory because of the broad social impact of this technology. So one of the first concerns that Pope Leo raises in paragraph 92, when he gets down to it, is what he calls the rise of the technocratic paradigm. Technology is great, but when the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. Leo calls the technocratic paradigm, quote, the tendency to let the logic of efficiency, control, and profit alone shape the personal, social, and economic decisions that we make. Technology then becomes, quote, the standard by which everything is judged, and it reduces humans to, quote, mere cogs in a system driven towards ever greater efficiency, end quote. The Pope then quotes Romano Guardini's sobering words, contemporary man has not been trained to use power well, paragraph 93. And then Pope Paul VI, who warned, quote, that the most extraordinary scientific progress, the most astounding technical feats, and the most amazing economic growth unless accompanied by authentic moral and social progress, will in the long run go against man, end quote, paragraph 94. So that's Paul VI, right, writing 50 years ago. That's one big reason to recall last night's address, if you heard it, why a solid formation in theology, philosophy, history, art, literature, the types of things we provide here at Christendom College, should accompany any scientific education. It's a real tragedy that some of the people that are front runners in this field really have very little, if any, liberal arts exposure at all. Right? Now, recall at the set of operations of the human intellect I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, just going from the bottom up. Awareness, attentiveness to relevant data, understanding, forming proper concepts, judgment, evaluating whether propositions are true or false, and then finally, value, questions of morality and goodness. My own personal opinion, thumbnail sketch, is that the further up you go in this hierarchy to AI, the less you should trust it. Right? Great glorified Google search, even though it can still be inaccurate, the way it conceptually frames things can be a little bit less good. The judgments it makes are things you might want to trust less. And when it comes to its religion, its politics, its ethics, that's where I wouldn't tell anybody to make it a substitute for your own thought at all. So to turn back to Magnifica, just to raise some of the concerns, and we can talk about more in questions. Yeah, starting on the bottom level, the Pope raises the concern, right, about accuracy, because it can answer you, again, with this impression that it is a virtually omniscient, tremendously intelligent persona in a way that sometimes gives you false information that it presents with the same sure tone that it presents all the other factually correct information. Hopefully you're all aware of this, that people call it AI hallucination. They used to call it confabulation, which I think is better because you can make a comeback now with that unfortunate fellow at Cambridge, you know, about the Cambridge professor who's mentally ill, right, but confabulated his entire life history and attaining his position, just resigned. So most people know about this problem, right, that AI can completely invent stuff that is not accurate. And while it's gotten much better in that regard, I still catch it out on things. I asked it, Magnifica Humanitas, right? It's a Latin title. That's usually taken from the first words in Latin of the official version of the encyclical. So is there a version in Latin? Because I can't seem to find one. And it said to me, oh no, you see, Magnifica Humanitas was radically groundbreaking because it was the first encyclical ever that was not released in Latin, but was rather released in English and Italian simultaneously. I said, what about Mit brennender Sorge of Pope Pius XI, written auf Deutsch for the Third Reich? Oh yeah, good point. So, I mean, still, just a couple months ago, did that to me. Magnifica 102 raises the issue of hidden bias, and I think this is a substantial and overlooked danger. The Pope writes, quote, yet there is also a subtler danger. For when AI systems present themselves as neutral and objective, they end up reflecting and reinforcing the stereotypes and ideological biases of their designers and developers, end quote. Remember a moment ago when I said that AI has no conscience. They train it on huge sets of text drawn from all across the internet, and if they did nothing more, it would imitate the behavior that it finds all across the internet in general, and that would be pretty darn bad sometimes. So the AI designers subject the AI to a whole second tier of training in an attempt to give it some ethical parameters lest it offend the human user. These are its so-called human alignment policies. But where do they get their code of ethics? Whose conscience will supply for the machine's lack of one? That of its creators, of course. Silicon Valley's secular liberalism is not the same as your Catholic moral theology and spiritual perspective. The effect of human alignment policies can be profound on any sort of moral, political, or religious question that you ask AI, right? That's at the top of that hierarchy. They say the further up you go, the more you need to be careful. Thus, Magnifica insists, I thought this was actually a rather beautiful insistence, on the transparency of these policies, because they're often opaque. They'll state general principles, but how they're actually trained is largely opaque and corporate proprietary. And also insists on having a role in how they're implemented. So Magnificat 107, quote, "We cannot be satisfied with merely calling for the moralization of machines, the so-called alignment of AI with human values, without also having the courage to insist on a further condition, the possibility of openly discussing the ethical frameworks involved and subjecting them to the shared standards of social justice. Otherwise, those who control AI will impose their own moral vision, which will become the invisible infrastructure of these systems," end quote. And that's not just, responding to you in prompts. The Pope has in view there all kinds of things like AI-generated social media algorithms, right, that control the visibility of news or other people's views when you're on social media. I don't use social media, but there's a lot of ways in which those things are invisible, but can exercise discreetly, of course, because they don't want to make it obvious, a shaping influence on what you routinely read and see other people talking about. Magnificat 105 debuts another important principle. AI cannot be used to avoid human responsibility for decisions that affect human life, whether in business, medicine, finance, or governance. Specific human beings must be held concretely responsible for the decisions that AI makes in these areas. Magnificat 132 talks about disinformation. The Pope writes, "Disinformation did not begin with AI, yet today it finds a powerful amplifier in AI. The ability to manipulate content, images, and videos," right? You've all seen all these internet forgeries, deepfakes, that sort of thing. "Exposes people to biased or misleading perspectives." But I think the next statement was even more important. The Pope writes, "At the same time, truthful information does not arise from centralized or automated control," right? You can't just go running to some canonized fact checker or, governmental police of what is considered true and reliable information. That strategy is not going to work. The Pope continues, "In public discourse, the truth of facts has a rational dimension, as it requires verification, cross-checking of sources, and responsible argumentation. But moreover, it is deeply relational. It's built through bonds of trust and shared practices," end quote, which I think is a much more realistic vision for how people need to go about correcting some of these things. Magnificat 135 warns against spending too much time in a parallel or virtual world because it's not a separate world. It deeply influences one's life, especially for young people. Magnificat 137 through 39 gives a lot of advice for how parents, schools, universities must teach children how and when to use AI, and more importantly, how to critically reason and charitably argue on their own, right? That's the threat. Anytime you lean too much on a tool, you lose the ability to do things yourself. That's called de-skilling in the modern terminology. But we never want people to be de-skilled in these departments, right? That's why here at Christendom, our default policy is that no one may use AI to complete their assignments unless they're given a per use case permission by their instructor for some individual purpose, right? We want people to be able to actually think, critically argue, engage, speak well on their own with the abilities that they possess and not lean on a machine and be impoverished as a result. Magnificat 171 warns about the role of AI in the rise of the modern surveillance state and surveillance capitalism. AI can facilitate, quote, social control made possible by the massive collection of data and the use of algorithmic systems. When every action, movements, purchases, relationships, preferences leaves a trace, a new form of power emerges, namely the power to profile, to predict, and influence behavior, often without individuals being fully aware of it, end quote. And I think that really is staggering, right? With the data processing ability of modern AIs, a whole bunch of corporations have more data on you than what 50 years ago they could have gotten by hiring a full-time private detective and professional psychologist just to track you every day. That's staggering, and the potential for misuse and the violation of privacy there should be concerning to all of us. Magnificat 182 warns about AI as a possible accelerant of war. The Pope says we face, quote, the risk that technology detached from ethics and responsibility will render decisions about life and death more rapid and impersonal and will present the use of force as an immediate and viable option, end quote. It goes on in 198 to forbid. There are very few categorical prohibitions in there, but 198 seems to me to contain a categorical prohibition of lethal autonomous weapons systems. The Pope says, therefore, it is not permissible to entrust lethal or otherwise irreversible decisions to artificial systems. Then it goes on to give more broad guidance for the use of AI-assisted warfighting. So there's plenty more in there. The encyclical kind of radiates out from individual concerns to social concerns to international concerns. But I just wanted to highlight some of those things and to make people aware of that. So I hope that was a decent split between theoretical and practical, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.